And at the end, we'll use the raise the hand, and if everybody can do a very brief question so everybody has a chance to ask Sal questions. Sal, by the way, is after retiring from a career as a security analyst and consultant working on the security and criminal justice issues, he's been our teacher ever since September of winter of 2021. And I was going to give a really long introduction, and Sal was afraid he'd go to sleep. So we're going to go ahead, and here's Sal.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I appreciate that much.
Oh, Sal, you got to unmute yourself. Oops. Sal, you're muted. Okay.
Okay.
And
So
also, so everybody can stop video.
I think we have it now. Okay, so for many of you have attended classes that I've done in the past, and I wanted to highlight there's a common theme, which is that to find root causes of conflicts, you must go deep into history to find it. And each time we can come to some iteration where there's a framing that's placed around it, we kind of like, if we look at World War II, many people will go to the killing of the Archduke Ferdinand and put a frame around that and say, okay, now we understand the root causes of the world wars. But I argue that no, it goes back long before that, and that to understand the conflicts, you have to keep going back in history. And my predisposition has been to go back to the beginning of our species and to understand where we came from and how the human experience has changed and how it has morphed into where we are today. We weren't always like we are now. We were very different for a long, long, long time. So, and the idea is for you to be able to discern patterns of human behavior, that it's not something that's unique to these people or those people. It's a part of the human experience and what we have made of the world around us. One of the people who is very well noted in military academies and in history is Sun Tzu, who is the author of The Art of War. We don't really know that Sun Tzu actually existed. It may be that Sun Tzu is really an accumulation of thoughts by different military theorists over time that have been compiled under this idea of the art of war. But for purpose of just going through the ideas, think of Sun Tzu as one person, and he presents that war is but a tool for a political outcome. And he makes a very strong argument for strategy, that whoever is leading the effort needs to think strategically in the use of military and all other resources. Sun Tzu says the objective is to utilize the least amount of resources that you have available to you in winning the political outcome, in achieving the political outcome. And he says, war should be the last resort. You should have expended all other avenues to find a resolution than to engage in war. And he would argue that it requires understanding the root cause of the problem. Oftentimes, if you'll see wars going on, and you think, well, they just want to gain this territory or that territory, this resource or that resource. They're mad about this or that. And it may be a completely different antagonism that is really at the heart of of the conflict. And so if you're not confronting that source of the antagonism, don't think that it's going to go away or somehow be resolved. As we talked about in the class on the Vietnam War, what was critical to the Vietnamese is that they were invaded by the French in 1858, and that they wanted foreigners out of their country. America didn't come to recognize that until 20 years after the war ended. Come on now, you should hang on. Let me get this moving here. There we go. So for what Sun Tzu preaches, America is not very good at. The problem is that we have so much power, we quickly go to the tool of muscle to be able to solve whatever conflict we have. Don't really know the root cause. I have to tell you, and this was in an informal meeting after 9/11, the discussion was, how should we respond to 9/11? And, they always thought I was the weird person. I don't know why they ever invited me to those things. Anyway, they come around to me and they go, I know we're going to get a weird comment from you. And I said, yeah, well, why did they attack us? Why? Why did they fly those planes into those buildings? What was the motivation behind it? And they all thought that was a stupid question. We still, and for many, they still don't know why and don't want to know. And this lack of doing in-depth research, understanding the true root of the problem and responding to it in a strategic and planned, organized way is the common link. Korea, Vietnam, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, and others. First, though, I want to talk about what is now a field in history, and that is big history. It's to say, let's get away from the immediate event, the micro event, the narrow view of what it is we're dealing with, and let's step back, way back, and look at a much broader, bigger picture. So it's saying, let's go to the beginning and read history forward. Eric Foner, professor at Columbia University, says to understand history, you must read it forward, not backwards. Because when you're going backwards, you kind of already have your bias as to what is really at play here, and you bring it back to the point that solidifies your point, but at the exclusion of the context, the broader context. And so what I think is important to understand is that life on our planet began as a single cell organism. That's how it began. And then, we have Ticklea Rose emerges out of the water and comes above ground over the past million years. And then we have Darwinius Marseille 10, 20 million years ago from the ape family, who really becomes the beginning of what becomes our species. And so, these organisms that are growing like that, they become more complex. It's not just a single cell. It's a much more complex living organism than that. And as life became more complex, the human experience changed. Let's take a look at that.
Life on Earth, living organisms have been relatively simple, single cells, but they had great diversity and inside great complexity. Then from about 600 to 800 million years ago, multi-celled organisms appear. You get fungi, you get fish, you get plants, you get amphibia, you get reptiles, and then of course you get the dinosaurs. And occasionally, there are disasters. 65 million years ago, an asteroid landed on Earth near the Yucatan Peninsula, creating conditions equivalent to those of a nuclear war. And the dinosaurs are wiped out. Terrible news for the dinosaurs, but great news for our mammalian ancestors, who flourished in the niches left empty by the dinosaurs. And we human beings are part of that creative evolutionary pulse that began 65 million years ago with the landing of an asteroid. Humans appeared about 200,000 years ago, and I believe we count as a threshold in this great story. Let me explain why. We've seen that DNA learns, in a sense. It accumulates information, but it is so slow. DNA accumulates information through random errors that some of which just happen to work. But DNA had actually generated a faster way of learning. It had produced organisms with brains, and those organisms can learn in real time. They accumulate information, they learn. The sad thing is, when they die, the information dies with them. Now, what makes humans different is human language. We are blessed with a language, a system of communication so powerful and so precise that we can share what we've learned with such precision that it can accumulate in the collective memory. And that means it can outlast the individuals who learnt that information, and it can accumulate from generation to generation. And that's why, as a species, we're so creative and so powerful, and that's why we have a history. We seem to be the only species in 4 billion years to have this gift. I call this ability collective learning. It's what makes us different. We can see it at work in the earliest stages of human history. We evolved as a species in the savanna lands of Africa, but then you see humans migrating into new environments, into desert lands, into jungles, into the ice age tundra of Siberia, tough environment, into the Americas, into Australasia. Each migration involved learning new ways of exploiting the environment, new ways of dealing with their surroundings. Then 10,000 years ago, exploiting a sudden change in global climates with the end of the last ice age, humans learned to farm. Farming was an energy bonanza, and exploiting that energy, human populations multiplied, human societies got larger, denser, more interconnected. And then, from about 500 years ago, humans began to link up globally through shipping, through trains, through telegraph, through the internet, until now we seem to form a single global brain of almost 7 billion individuals, and that brain is learning at warp speed. And in the last 200 years, something else has happened. We've stumbled on another energy bonanza in fossil fuels. So fossil fuels and collective learning together explain the staggering complexity we see around us. So, here we are, back at the convention center. We've been on a journey, a return journey of 13.7 billion years. I hope you agree this is a powerful story, and it's a story in which humans play an astonishing and creative role, but it also contains warnings. Collective learning is a very, very powerful force, and it's not clear that we humans are in charge of it. I remember very vividly as a child growing up in England, living through the Cuban Missile Crisis. For a few days, the entire biosphere seemed to be on the verge of destruction. And the same weapons are still here, and they're still armed. If we avoid that trap, others are waiting for us. We're burning fossil fuels at such a rate that we seem to be undermining the Goldilocks conditions that made it possible for human civilizations to flourish over the last 10,000 years. So what big history can do is show us the nature of our complexity and fragility and the dangers that face us. But it can also show us our power with collective learning. And now, finally, this is what I want. I want my grandson, Daniel, and his friends and his generation throughout the world to know the story of big history and to know it so well that they understand both the challenges that face us and the opportunities that face us. And that's why a group of us are building a free online syllabus in big history for high school students throughout the world.
Needless to say, that history plan, though, will not be welcomed in Florida or Texas because it could make people upset. And so what we get is the complexity of our society, of our species about 10,000 years ago. The experience for humans changes because we discover agriculture and animal husbandry. We took control over the sources of food. And through that, it led to more complex societies. And what happens is we find a way to grow food, we find a way to store food, we become sedentary, we live in one spot. When things don't work out right, and one person is without food, they look to their neighbors for help. If the neighbors don't help, we then get warfare. As people are starving to death, they attack for food. And out of that warfare, we have the vanquished in warfare, and what happens to them? They ultimately become slaves, enslaved people. And this, mind you, this is something that goes on over thousands of years. This whole phenomenon of, I've got excess, I need to create a protective edifice to protect my stuff from people who don't have my stuff and want my stuff. And then as they build up their armies over this long period of time, they then look at their other neighbors who are doing the same thing that they're doing, and they start thinking, well, you know, I need to attack them now and take their excess stuff before they attack us and take our excess stuff. Mind you, all of this becomes defensive. We're attacking them to defend ourselves. You know, it's preemptive. I mean, these are all words used in the Iraq-Afghanistan wars. Okay, and so this builds up over time, and then people are now embarking upon empires, and it starts about 5,000 years ago with the Akkadian Empire. And the Akkadian Empire is set within the cradle of civilization. The Middle East is at the center of it. And the Akkadians weren't the only ones to create empires. Then along comes the Persian Empire. And then the Persian Empire lasts until it comes up against the Roman Empire. So, and what are all of these empires? The British Empire, all of them. They are bullies who are out to take resources away from other humans occupying other parts of the world. The point is that this is a pattern, and it's important to see that pattern and how humans began to prey upon each other. And so we have what is the cradle of empires. Wonderful graphic put together by Lauren. We should have that signed on the bottom. And so the Akkadian Empire takes place, cradle of civilization. Who's right next door? Persia. And I'm working on a class that's going to be about the history of the Balkans, because what happens there? They follow the same pattern. Empires try to attack and take over, and we get frictions that are going on through today. So it's important to understand them and where they come from. This class will concern the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, along with hostility to Iran. So I'm carving a frame around what I plan to talk about, but it is important to have the context of what happened before, because again, it's simply playing out in its most current iteration. An emphasis is placed on 1979 because several events happened in 1979 that set these countries on a path to war and against, with and against America. How it is, however, just another in the long list of wars. In 1979, remember we had the Cold War going on, and we were, who's going to win the Cold War, the communists or the Democrats, the Soviet Union or America? This nonsense that was like an intramural basketball team. But that was, on the minds of all of the great world leaders. And Jimmy Carter was presented with an idea that was to somehow make up for America's loss in Vietnam, that we were embarrassed by Vietnam, and that what we saw was an opportunity to cause an event that would be an embarrassment to the Soviets. And the Soviets were friends with Afghanistan. There was conflict going on there. We saw an opportunity to agitate that internal conflict so that the Russians would get drawn into a war and suffer their Vietnam. And in neighboring Iran, a revolution was underway in 1979, replacing the secular government of the US-friendly Shah of Iran with a sectarian government under the Ayatollah Khomeini. And in nearby Iraq, Saddam Hussein contemplated repairing relationships with America, relationships that frayed when Saddam nationalized Iraq's oil assets, specifically those of Exxon in 1972. It had seemed that to Saddam, that America's conflict with Iran might provide Saddam with an opportunity to be a puppet for America and in the process repair relationships. Before the wars, Afghanistan was a poor, mostly rural nation. It was making advances toward an open and a secular and a progressive society. Before the wars, Iran was wealthy. Even though there was cleavage between the rich and the poor, the secular government under the Shah was clumsy in governing, but it was not at war with itself. Before the wars, Iraq was financially strong. It was considered the highest standard of living in the Middle East. The Sunni minority had held power in Iraq, even though the Shia were the majority population. Saddam recognized the Shia majority, and over objections from people in his own Ba'ath Party, who were Sunni, he included them in the benefits of the oil interest. So you had, within Iraq, people who may not have liked Saddam Hussein at all, who said, yeah, but we've got good healthcare, we have good schools, we have, good living conditions. In the end, when it's all over, Afghanistan is broken and is now living under the rule of a sectarian government. Iraq has stumbled from one of the highest standards of living in the Middle East to rubble. It's a government in disarray, and sectarian forces are ruling the streets. And rich in oil, Iran struggles under severe economic sanctions, which we heard some about this past week, and it also has a sectarian government. The roadmap for the classes is that oil is discovered at the turn of the 20th century under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans eventually took over those areas of Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. The focus of the class is on the impact on Iraq and Iran, While on a separate track, America is ashamed of losing the Vietnam War while it's engaged in the Cold War with Russia, and Afghanistan is seen as a means for inflicting a similar shame on Russia. So we have these three countries involved in events that operate in parallel and converge to be a real nightmare for America. It's important to understand that when the U.S. instigated the war between the Russians to get involved with the Afghan issues, it was viewed as a stroke of genius. And that stroke of genius set off an avalanche. We're going to look at instigating a war in Afghanistan is linked with the Iran-Iraq war, with the Taliban, who didn't exist before then, with the rise of Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, who didn't exist before we decided to break Afghanistan. It's connected to the 9/11 attack, to the Iraq invasion of Kuwait, the Gulf War, and the U.S. use of torture. Murder of American citizens abroad, a massive refugee crisis that has nearly brought Europe to its knees, and American anger that has resulted in the Trump presidency and the January 6th insurrection. Understanding how we arrived at this point requires background in Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. These were the lands of the Akkadian Empire. This is the Akkadian Empire. You can see the Persian Gulf in the lower right-hand corner, the Mediterranean Sea in the lower left-hand corner. This gives you another look at the countries that were essentially the root of the Akkadian Empire. Understand, and I mentioned to you that Iran was the Persian Empire, right? And right next door to it is Saudi Arabia, meaning that's where Arabs are living. So you have Persians living in Iran and Afghanistan, and in Saudi Arabia, you have Arab. They're not one and the same. There's lots of antagonisms between them. So when it comes to the fight with Afghanistan, and we want to link, others, Arab countries as being connected with them, understand that didn't play very well, particularly when Osama bin Laden goes to support the Afghans in fighting the Russians. The Afghans, Persians, wanted to keep arm's length distance between them and he. The story begins with Iran, a predominantly Shia Islamic country that has been targeted for centuries. Let me stop that. By outside invaders. Let's get a look at that history.
But the storm clouds of progress were gathering. The colonial powers were at the gates. These were the days of the Great Game, when England in the south and Russia in the north competed for control of the seas between Europe and Asia. Caught between Iraq, the Caucasus, and Afghanistan, Persia was already a powder keg. Persia, which would soon change its name to Iran, was already having to bow to foreign power. An 11-year-old boy was the last of the Qajar dynasty to accede to the throne. The monarchy was flailing. Its dying reign lasted 2 decades. In 1905, news of European revolutions and nationalisms echoed through the bazaars of Tehran. Word was out on the streets. Change was brewing. The intellectuals, middle classes, and religious leaders rose up. In 1906, Iran was the first Middle Eastern country to adopt a constitution and a Western-style parliament.
به این دلیل که به تدریج صحبت از تسلط خارجی به میان آمد، به تدریج صحبت از بین رفتن بنیادهای اقتصاد ملی به میان آمد و به تدریج حمله به مظاهر دینی و توسعه فساد. در حقیقت روحانیت تصورش این بود که تجدد در حال از بین بردن دین هست.
نه تنها بین انقلاب و دین در آغاز تضادی نبود، در اون وقت اقشار مذهبی تضادی با غرب احساس نمی کردن، بلکه برعکس بود. وقتی که پیشرفت‌های غرب رو می شنیدن، مخصوصا از لحاظ آزادی و قانون مداری، برشون بسیار جذاب بود.
There was a general consensus among the leaders, including the religious leaders and the liberal leaders or laymen.
روح انقلاب مشروطه درست مذهب و اسلام درش خیلی پررنگ بود، ولی روح انقلاب تجدد خواهانه بود.
ایرانی ها از یه خواب نسبتاً طولانی بیدار بشن و متوجه بشن که از کاروان تمدن جهانی فاصله گرفتن.
But it was not the alliance between Islam and democracy that led the country towards modernization. The 20th century would be revolutionized by the discovery of oil.
Before 1908, the oil was known seeping from the rocks in Iran from antiquity, and they were called the burning fires.
Le pétrole, c'est une malédiction pour tous les pays qui le découvrent.
In some respects, it's been a curse, but in others, it has been a great blessing because it was the first country to have developed oil with the British in there, and this has enabled the country to develop in many ways.
On April 14th, 1909, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was born. London established its power.
The main imperialist regime during those days was Britain. And we can say that they were trying to have good control on the politics of Iran, and through having this industry of the oil, for sure they wanted to control the future of Iran economically as well.
And so when oil is up here, when oil is discovered and it coincides with the development of the combustion engine, the auto industry has taken hold, and oil now takes on a very formidable presence. Mind you, the Ottoman Empire had ruled over this area. And so when they think that there's oil there, but again, the market for oil has not emerged yet, it's starting to emerge. And the Ottomans or the Iranians don't really know how to drill for oil and what to do with it. So the Ottomans make deals with Western oil companies to search for oil. And in these deals, they say, you know, if we find there's oil and if you're able to extract it and make money from it, we'll take a certain percentage out of that. And so it was fairly modest amounts. So the Ottomans make these deals. The Ottomans are partnered with Germany in World War I. They lose. Shortly thereafter, the Ottoman Empire fractures and the Ottomans are gone. But now the oil companies are in a very firm position, and they're not about to renegotiate the deals that they made with the Ottomans. And so, you know, in these early days, Russia and England are competing to try to get a hold of these resources, and conflict now is there centered around oil. Let's look at what happens when we have conflict and America winds up being attacked on 9/11. Failing to do any thorough research or analysis, America merely wants to vent its anger. In Iraq, America's lack of intelligence, crafted strategy, and detailed plan is a testament to that, what I would consider incompetence. Here's an excerpt from a video about the Iraq War.
President Bush was missing in action on the planning for the post-war. He deferred to his vice president and his secretary of defense the control over those decisions.
Why on earth, if you were president of the United States, would you plan to use military force and then divorce yourself from essentially the most important aspect of that use, and that is the aftermath?
Who is in charge of this war?
I don't want to go through the list. I mean, it was the president, the vice president, secretary of defense, those around all those people.
Do you include national security advisor?
Sure.
The vice president you include?
Yeah. That was the inner team that produced the thinking behind the war.
My mistake was probably not finding a way to get myself more involved in the planning process of things.
I see. Yeah. So that the dissolution of the Army wouldn't have been a surprise,
Right.
for example?
Well, and I could have raised hell about it, you know, and had my day in court. I may have lost, but I'd had my day in court. Yeah.
The system ought to be participatory and ought to include people who are willing to say, this makes no sense, Mr. President. This is a bad idea. And I don't think that kind of decision-making process existed in the Bush administration. I certainly didn't feel myself participating in such a decision-making process.
The administration never asked for any estimate or community assessment on Iraq before we went to war.
Nobody seemed to be interested in what the community had to say?
I think it's more a matter that minds were made up, the course was set. Whatever analysis on these sorts of issues was to have been done, the decision makers felt they had already done it themselves.
Vice President Cheney, of course, takes many of the same positions that Secretary Rumsfeld did on the war. Does he still have your complete confidence?
Yes, he does.
Do you expect him to stay to
the campaign is over.
Term?
Yes, he does.
And he'll be here for the remainder
yes,
of your
will.
term?
There are nights when I don't sleep very well, that I fault myself for not pushing the issue, that I think I should have gone and kicked his door in and said, damn it, listen, this was a mistake. We need to do something to rectify it. But I never had the opportunity to do it. And trying to kick in a door, you know, with an ambassador who's essentially the czar of Iraq, you know, for a colonel to try and do it just wasn't going to happen. You couldn't get past the front door.
If my speaking out adds even infinitesimally to the criticism that counts of this administration, then that's good. I don't pretend to say that I've been effective in that regard, but I just can't hold my peace any longer.
We will bring to the Iraqi people food and medicines and supplies and freedom.
Cheer!
And it just was henny penny, the sky is falling.
General Garner and I are pledged to working very closely together.
There is a large number of former Iraqi soldiers that are unemployed now.
One was guerrilla war, another was insurgency, another was unconventional war. Pardon me? What? No, that's someone else's business, quagmires. I don't do quagmires.
I'm listening. I'm listening to political leaders.
Someday in my life in the future, I gotta look back to Iraq and I gotta see something done in there so I can look back and say, I was part of this, and my suffering and my loss have a meaning.
If the situation gets better, I am going to leave Iraq. I will leave Iraq, but now I'm a fighter. I mean, all my life. I won't leave Iraq now.
From here, we can't change anything because it's out of control now. I don't have future plans for being in Iraq. I don't see the bit of light at the end of the tunnel yet.
This is what it is. This is how we live it. This is how we see it. This is how we smell it and feel it. It's not a situation that you can say, let's try this, it will help. Let's try this, it will help. No, it's not.
And are you telling me that's the best America can do? No. Don't tell me that. Don't tell the Marines who fought for a month in Najaf that. Don't tell the Marines who are still fighting every day in Fallujah that that's the best America can do. That makes me angry.
Great respect that I have for your leadership.
Okay, well, the people of Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan have been subjects of the Ottoman Empire and monarchs, leaving them with little more than a struggle to survive and to embrace faith in the hope of a better tomorrow. Western democracy represented government of the people, government for the common good, even if the veneer was little more than an illusion. The scramble for Africa focused on natural resources, not people. In Iran and Iraq, the West saw oil and only oil. Next week, we will look at the Turkish Petroleum Company and the Anglo-Persian Petroleum Company and how they came to dominate in Iraq and in Iran. Okay, we can open for questions and comments.
Please use the raise your hand function, and you can switch to gallery view at this point. And turn on your video if you're going to ask this question.
As usual, Sal, you've given everyone so much information, they're just kind of...
Anne's got a question. Hold on a second. Anne, can you unmute and turn on your video?
Yeah.
And flip on your video.
I'm trying to get that video. There, I think it's on now.
You're good.
Okay. Now tell me what year it was, that last video that we just saw with Bush Jr.
That would have been 2006, that time frame. When we get to Seth Moulton, I believe that's around 08.
Okay, that was one question. The
war wasn't over by then.
Yeah. The other comment I had was, wouldn't it be nice to hear Jimmy Carter's response to that criticism of him proving the CIA fomenting that Afghanistan scenario that you said that he was responsible for. Of course, he's not in any position to comment on those things these days, but I would have loved to have heard what his take was on that particular comment. And George W. Bush's comments too on that last film, but I guess we won't hear that either.
Well, we don't have Jimmy Carter on video talking about what happened in '79, but we do have Zbigniew Brzezinski, and we also have the book by not Bill Gates, the CIA Gates. Can't remember his name now. So what we have is that's 1979. The Soviet Union falls in 91, 92. The fall of the Berlin Wall is 89. Reagan comes to office after 79, and he's there 80 to 88. And so when the Berlin Wall comes down, the Reagan administration takes credit for the demise of communism, and that this was a victory over the Russians. Now, what happens is Gates writes a book, the former CIA head at the time of Carter's administration, and he says, no, it wasn't the Bush-Reagan administration that brought down the Soviet Union. It was Jimmy Carter. And he writes in his book that, we started bringing them down. We kept it secret that we did what we did, and said we didn't start supporting the Afghanis until after the Russians invaded. But in fact, we started 6 months before the Russians invaded. So we have that. And then Brzezinski, when George H.W. Bush comes into power, he is touting how they have brought down, the evil empire of the Soviet Union. And Brzezinski goes on air and says, now we can reveal it, that we, the Carter administration, brought down the Soviets. Then after that, we have 2011. And now we know that the people who brought down the Soviets, the Mujahideen, are the people allegedly who flew planes into the World Trade Center. So Brzezinski then does a backtrack, and he says, no, we didn't start all that stuff. And so they keep going back and forth. The fact of the matter is, if you go over to the archives, you can get a copy of the order at Carter Center.
Laura?
When you first started the presentation and you were talking about the long history of humankind and how long it took us to get to the point where we started beating up on each other, a thought just came to me, and I Googled how many years since 1776 has the United States been at peace? And I realized there's probably different definitions of war and peace, but the answer came back 17 years.
Yeah.
That we've been at peace. So
yeah, and when you look at not just at America, but around the globe, when have we had peace? Mind you, before we had agriculture, humans still hadn't fully developed. We were, a much smaller population, a fraction of the number of people that we have today, but we didn't have armies. I mean, there were conflicts amongst the hunter-gatherer. If one person came into hunting grounds that one group had been hunting, they would have, fights, but it wasn't to the level of empire building or anything along those lines. So it really, you see a sharp transition happens 10,000 years ago. And during that, from 10,000 to 5,000 years, things are taking shape and they're morphing and changing. And then we get, after the first 5,000 years, then we get the first empire. And following shortly on the heels of the first empire is Abraham. Within 350 years, along comes Abraham. And what does he say? You don't have to make sacrifices to gods anymore. You got to follow a moral code. We now start to get the ideas of morality. Is it moral to be killing each other to be able to service the emperor? It's just kind of interesting to see all of that stuff play out. Yeah. Thanks.
Howard?
Yes. Just a couple of quick things. You mentioned Eric Hoffer earlier on. Did he write The True Believer also?
Eric, who was that?
Eric Hoffer.
I don't remember Eric Hoffer. Which one?
I thought you mentioned. Who did? I thought you mentioned them earlier in the conversation.
I may have.
Anyway.
I just remember I forget stuff just as much as everybody else does.
Okay. When I heard his name, it reminded me
too.
of a book I read a long time ago called The True Believer. And anyway, that's a moot point now.
No, I don't remember referencing that. Sorry.
Okay. And Vietnam, the invasion of the French, wasn't it preceded by the invasion of the Chinese for a longer period of time?
Oh yeah. The China 1,000 years before the Chinese tried to take control over Vietnam too, and they failed.
And the French were there for almost 100 years, and the United States somehow thought that 1,100 years that we could somehow change history by going in and conquering the Vietnamese. Absolutely no sense of history whatsoever. Or those that Americans that did have a sense of history were ignored by the politicians. In Iran, didn't the United States begin its meddling when they replaced the Shah with the CIA replaced the Shah with the democratically elected government at the time in the 50s or something?
Well, we put in the shore.
Yeah. What happened was, we're going to talk about it in the future classes, but that was Mossadegh, who was democratically elected. Remember, is that in that clip about Iran, they said they had a constitution, they had a democratic representation, and they elected Mossadegh. But then, and Mossadegh wanted, again, we had the conflict over the agreements that were made by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire by the 1950s was over for 40 years.
Right.
And they want to renegotiate. Well, and they won't. So Mossadegh says, hey, this is our country. We'll nationalize the whole thing and just throw out all the oil companies. Kermit Roosevelt, I guess he was nephew or son of FDR, led the CIA effort to overthrow Mossadegh, and that's what happens. Yeah.
Thank you.
Margita?
Hey.
Hi, Margita.
Hi, Sal. How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Thank you. Same here. I am not totally clear about the Ottoman Empire. Is it just the Turkey that we're talking about, or did they have alliances with others included in that term?
Yeah, it's complicated. The Ottomans, you can look at them as being Turks, but it wasn't Turkey taking over those other places. The Ottomans were a force unto themselves, and they were linked with others in different locations, but they then became a dominant force over a wide range of the Middle East and Europe.
Yeah. I was
there was just a recent
such
book.
a small country, Turkey would have so much power.
Yeah. Though there's a recent book done on the Ottomans. I haven't read it, but it's gotten a lot of attention. It's supposed to be, well written and interesting, and tells the story. It's a complicated story, though, about we don't even know if there's someone who's actually named Ottoman. So it's one of those kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Ralph?
Yeah. Hey, Sal. Good morning.
Good to see you.
You know, like many of you probably, I've watched documentaries and read some articles looking at the Iraq War in retrospect, and some of them seem to take a position that when the military action was over, the planning that was not done, you know, began to have its effect. And one of the biggest things that we've all heard about is that there was no plan to continue the income, if you will, for the people running the actual non-sectarian government of Iraq. That would include all the civil servants, members of the Ba'ath Party, who were largely the ones holding all those civil service positions, and the military. Now, you can make an exception for the military since they were trying to kill Americans, you know, who were fighting there. But there seems to be this idea that if steps had been taken then to continue what you might call law and order, because at that point there were a lot of Iraqis who were glad to see Saddam Hussein booted the hell out, and there was not chaos, and the Islamic those leaders that we might say are extremists, they were not in power. They did not have a lot of influence. They were not who society was looking to for leadership. So I wonder what you think of that idea, because if the point was partly to, we're going to go in there and we're going to win this one, not like Vietnam, by God, we're going to go in there and we're going to win this one. What if there had been a plan to keep the civil service intact? People get their paychecks. They're not in the streets with signs saying, we just want our salaries. That's all we want. Those people are not in the streets. Could we have packed up and gone home and had a better outcome? What do you think?
Well, we're going to get into that in more depth in the future classes, but that was again, it was the Donald Rumsfeld and the, you know, the guys who really wanted to use American power.
Mm-hmm.
They were not going to go fight a war with their hands behind their back. We don't do quagmires. We get in and we get out. Mind you,
you might break a few eggs.
Mind you, Donald Rumsfeld has no military experience at all. He's utterly ignorant. And so the idea, Jake Garner, who was on, wanted to create a plan. You know, what are we going to do after, you know, we dethrone Saddam? And he was run off. He was run off. And so what you had is, we don't need to do all that intellectual stuff. We need to simply go in, remove them, get out, and turn it over to them. Well, what you did, again, it comes down to, did you have the intelligence to be able to even craft a plan? They didn't. Rumsfeld comes out and says, we're going to go and attack, we're going to bomb them here and bomb them there. The intelligence people come back and say, okay, we've done that, and why don't we give them a little time, just stop the bombing so we can get a little time here. We're not doing that. We did that in Vietnam. And it was, you know, there was no understanding of what you had is, yeah, there are people who didn't like Saddam Hussein. Of course, the minority, the Sunni, have the power. Saddam is part of the power structure, but the majority of the country is Shia. Mm-hmm. And Saddam says there's a lot more of them than there are of us. We got to cut them in on the action. And so what he does is he nationalizes the oil assets, and they then get a surplus of like $80 billion. What's he do with it? He builds roads, hospitals, schools, better housing. You know, he's not a kleptocrat. He's not like Putin and the others who are, you know, kleptocracies. And so the people, the Sunni who don't like him, don't like that he's doing things that are benefiting the Shia. Think about that. How, you know, here in America, we can come up with great ideas for healthcare and stuff like that, but we have people who hate it. Why? Because it's going to benefit them. Same situation. So when his opposition would scream that he's given things away to those people being the Shia, Saddam took out his pistol and walked over and killed them. That's what he did. So you can talk about him being a brutal dictator, but you know, I think there's a couple of people in Washington right now who wish they could do the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. Now, so Saddam was holding this thing together, built the highest standard of living in the Middle East.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Saddam is a great guy. I'm not here to defend Saddam.
Right,
It doesn't matter. It is now when you're going to rip the lid off of that thing, look out, because a lot of stuff is going to come out.
So this imagined outcome, maybe, but it was lack of planning, lack of a plan, lack of knowing what was going to happen when we just took over and said, great, we're done. Lack of that means that it maybe, but it was never ever going to happen, was it? We were never going to have were never going to have this great plan, pay off the civil service, the country runs itself, and we'll gradually back away. That was never going to happen.
No, I wish I could share with you things that I said at the time as to what was going to happen. I'm talking at the point of the Gulf War, right? Do you realize what you're opening the door to? And, you know, when we went through the Gulf War and we, you know, Schwarzkopf, you know, wins within a couple of hours and it's all over. I had one guy come out and say to me, so I guess you were wrong. I said, you think it's over. They don't.
Right. Give it time.
Give it time. And what happened was totally predictable. Totally predictable. It was, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on, but yeah, we're gonna look at more of that, and we're gonna look at how Rumsfeld refused to deal with any of those issues. He didn't have to. When it comes to linking Iraq to Afghanistan, Iraq and, you know, Arabs and Persians and all that stuff, they say, you know, you need to go tell the intelligence people we need to have a link between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. And they said, we've looked, it ain't there. Oh, but he had a meeting. There was a meeting between Iraqis and Al-Qaeda people in this other country. And, well, what happened, mind you, if you understand Saddam Hussein and how he would deal with a militant organization, Islamic organization, he would take out his pistol and kill them. Right. He's not going to be in bed with them over anything.
No.
It's, you know,
never was.
But it's almost like the people who were in those positions, who you would think would know a lot about this stuff, right, who had read the books, would know it, but they didn't.
Oh, God. Good. Bad. Yeah.
Hey, so, Sal, you're going to give us a preview of next week?
Well, we're gonna look at the I had it written down here. We're really gonna look more at how the scramble for Africa played a part in this and in the whole history of it. And we're going to look at how the oil companies come in and they create their companies, but they're almost like sovereign governments within Iraq and Iran. And so we're going to take when people say it's not about oil, it is about oil, oil, oil.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, everybody.
Can unmute and let's.
Thanks, Sal.
And
Thanks,
give
Sal.
Sal a warm round of applause. Thank you, Sal.
Thank you,
Sal.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sal.
Thanks. Hope you found it fun.
Fun.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love hearing about war. It just excites the hell out of me.
What could be more fun?
Joy, what's it good for?
What?
What's it good for?
Hey, Kay.
Nothing.
Hi, thank you, Sal.
Hey, good to see
Thanks,
you.
Sal.
Okay, everybody, be safe.
Later.
I have to run to the VA today to try to fix my broken elbow. So
Oh,
we'll see you next week.
have fun.